Well, that did not help. And we're live. God damn you. God damn you.
Your best chance is to run from this place.
On Shadyside, we're all cursed. The devil is in me.
And this is for fighting these things?
Try not to die.
Welcome to the suck.
Yes, welcome to the Suck Indeed. Welcome to Shows Which You Know, a Fear Street Fable. My name is Jim Scampoli, and I love watching horror films.
My name is Jacob Burrows, and I never watch horror films, but I have watched all of Fear Street Part 2, 1978, and Part 3, 1666. I feel like the naming convention is good when you see it like written down, and then when you try to go like Part 2 and then a year, it just gets confusing. So we're just gonna say it's all of Fear Street. We did an episode already talking about the first part. This time we're combining parts 2 and 3, all the rest of it, and chatting about all of it. So if you want a spoiler-free section, check out our previous episode at showswhatyouknow.com. But in this one, I think we're just gonna dive into the whole rest of it and everything else that happened in Fear Street. Does that make sense, Jim?
Yes, that makes sense. And actually, before we even dive into Part 2 and Part 3, I want to talk a little bit about the project in general. Now, I didn't realize this, or I guess I kind of knew this and forgot, whatever. But this was initially supposed to be a theatrical release, and they were going to do one a month last summer.
Right.
But obviously, you know, COVID happened, so movies were not coming out in theaters. And it was going to be distributed by Fox, but then Fox was bought by Disney. So, you know, two monkey wrenches thrown into the system, but here's Netflix to save the day. And we talked a little bit about this talking about Part 1, but it's cool that Netflix was like, yeah, all right, we'll give them somewhat of a window where we can release them without just dropping them all at once. Yeah. So you see a little bit like, I think it's such a cool idea if they did get to do theatrical and it was like one a month. I mean, I don't know if people like to go to the movies as much as me, but I think that would have been exciting. It's still cool the way they did it here. What's up, Kal-El in the chat? We're live on our Shows What You Know YouTube. I'd love to see it. But it's cool that still we got this like 3-week summer event. So I just want to give shout outs to that because I think it's a very cool idea, very cool release strategy. And I hope we see more things like that in the future.
Yeah, and it's interesting that the change and what it would have meant, because I was thinking about like Part 2 and wondering, would I have enjoyed it as much if I couldn't move on? Like, would I have felt I gotten my movie tickets worth from Part 2? Just because I didn't think it was bad or anything, but at the same time, I was kind of like, we're kind of in the same spot now that we were at the end of Part 1. And to be fair, at the end of it, I was like, oh no, some of the stuff in there was actually more relevant. Like, it comes back around and it makes sense. But like, just at the time, I was like, it is essentially a flashback. The third one doesn't have that problem, but when we were talking about them before, we were like very glad that the current timeline was continuing, so we didn't have so it wasn't just like a flashback for the whole film. But film 2 is essentially a flashback for the whole film, which kind of makes it a bit difficult to get invested from my perspective. But actually, maybe in a movie theater it would have been like, it is such a different setting. And as I said, I never watch horror films, so just because I talked about last time, it's not my favorite genre. I don't dislike them, but I don't seek them out either. So I probably wouldn't have seen it in a theater. But then I'm like, if I saw it in a theater, I actually probably would have been way more spooked and engaged as well with all the scenes, with all the darkness and like loud noises. Because on your Netflix screen, on my laptop screen, I'm like, yeah, this is fine. But then maybe there I'd be way more engaged. So I don't know. It was just an interesting thought of how it might have worked differently.
Because Part 2 might be my favorite just because of the vibes. The summer
vibes
camp
are great. Yeah.
The summer camp slasher vibes, I think they nail the best. But you're right, just talking narratively as far as like plot wise and stuff like that, it does put things on hold a bit, especially if you're, gearing up to see how things are gonna play out in 1994. Somewhat on topic, somewhat off topic, but I did want to also, before I forget, I wanted to call out the director, Lee Janiak. I'm not sure I'm saying her name correct or not. Do you know who she's married to?
No, who?
one of the Duffer Brothers. Shout outs. Netflix, the Netflix power couple. If you don't know, Duffer Brothers, creators of Stranger Things, a couple Stranger Things alum in these movies as well. But I thought that was kind of a weird little connection there. And she does talk about how she doesn't want the Fear Street trilogy to end here. She hopes to create the horror spin on the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Now, on one hand, I roll my eyes at that because everyone's trying to do their own spin on the Marvel Cinematic Universe. But if anything, these were, I think, in the end, very well done. There's definitely some nitpicks you can have here. I would welcome it with this because I'm still jonesing to see more of some of these killers that they hint at through the history of, Fear Street and some of the different takes on slashers that have come up with. Plus, I'm sure there's some other things they can go around because now that we know the mystery of Sarah Fear, that wouldn't be as interesting. But I'm ready to see some more of these killers and some of the other stuff they have in store for us.
Yeah, and even beyond that, I haven't really read R.L. Stine books, but I know there's a lot of them, right? So there could be a lot of source material. If you want to sit in a room and come up with 10 ideas for horror films that are R.L. Stine books, but we make it fucking dark and adult, I'm sure you could come up with loads of great ideas from that and make them all interconnect in a sort of, Marvel or Stephen King kind of way. Could be really cool.
Absolutely.
On the second one, I totally agree on the vibes. Never been in a summer camp, but I have watched The Parent Trap 100 times. So I feel like I have a weird nostalgia tied up in it, even though I've never been, just from movies. And so I'm watching at the start of this. I'm just going, this is so cool. I want to watch a film that's just this. Too bad people got to get murdered.
Yeah. Now, one thing I think they did leave us hanging on, I mean, because again, I'm sure we'll kind of jump back and forth between 2 and 3 because we are discussing them as a whole now. With Britta from Community, who's what, C Berman, or well, she was Ziggy. That was the twist. I mean, I kind of saw that coming. Not to be that.
I'll get into that in a sec. Sorry, go on.
But there's some things that's left hanging with that character. Now, because she had all these clocks around her house, and I get that obviously she's suffered this trauma, from the 70s. She lost her sister. Everyone thinks she's crazy. It's understood that she's weird, but I thought they were hinting at more of some sort of supernatural element to what happened to her because she has all these clocks. She won't leave her house. I mean, I guess part of it's because she's counting down the days. She keeps marking on her calendar how many days it's been since it's happened. But I was waiting for some sort of reveal on that never really came. And maybe, I mean, I assume that's just me. I just felt like there were these details. I was waiting for it to amount to something, and it kind of didn't. I guess it was just more about that she's kind of eccentric because of the trauma she experienced.
Yeah, and at the end of the first film, which I think the first film might be my favorite still, because it introduces a lot of stuff in a fun, interesting way. And 2 and 3, I think, do a good job of expanding upon it. But still, at the end of the first one, she calls our main characters, right, and says that it's never over. The witch never lets you go. And then Sam is possessed after that. So, but seems like she was fine after this, At least it's never really mentioned. But to be fair, she still lives in Shadyside, which there's a serial killer every couple of years. So it makes sense to double check your locks and so on. But still, she didn't really have a reason to go it's never going to be over. And Sam becoming possessed after the fact is not something that happened to her or something similar like it. So I don't really know what that was about. I mean, it was probably all about just accelerating us into film 2, to be honest. But I can see where you're coming from. It's not fully resolved. All the clocks kind of indicate she's OCD about making sure she's safe or what have you. But they don't really get very into it.
Yeah, I guess it was almost like little red herrings because that's what I was expecting to see, how the curse was still affecting her. Years later. Although I had to keep reminding myself because you start to think okay, we're flashing back to 78, but here we are in present day. And it's well, no, present day is not now. You forget it because it's oh, she's wouldn't she be way older now? It's like, oh,
I
no,
was
we're
thinking that
94.
too.
Yeah. It's like, no, we're just going to 94, which, 16 years later, but still, it's not like jumping here to 2021. But yeah, I mean, they nail like the Friday the 13th, summer camp slasher vibes. There's a lot of child death in the second one. It is handled off screen, and I'm glad to see that online people were really bummed about that nerdy kid that gets killed after being bullied. I don't know if you remember that, like the little fat kid with glasses. He gets like egged, and then you kind of expect that he won't get killed, but he just immediately gets murdered, and that hurts because we're all that kid. That's all about.
Yeah, it's great. People were sad about it. Were they sad like in a way of like this is bad filmmaking, or were they sad like that was an efficient way of making us upset about the death?
Yeah, no, it was just an efficient way of being like bummed out. It just showing how savage the movies were. Because I do wish there was a little bit more gore in the second one. I'm kind of a gore hound. That's why I enjoy the bread. Like the bread slicer kill in the first one is the best kill of the whole series, which is fine.
And also, I mean, besides just graphically, the graphic violence of it, it's like the best character that dies as well, in my opinion. Out of all the characters that die, and so it's just extra good from that.
Yeah. So, I mean, a lot of it's kind of off screen. I don't know if that's like budgetary reasons or because it is child death. It wouldn't be as fun if we did see some of these young kids getting completely butchered on screen. A quick plug for myself, by the way. I'm sure other people have hopped on this by now, but on my TeePublic page, if you search Jim and Them on TeePublic, I do have my Color Wars 78 shirts. You can either get your blue for Shady Side, or you can get your red for Sunnyvale, or why not get both? I thought that was a pretty clever idea on my part, because when I saw those Color Wars 78 shirt, I was like, I need one of those.
Yeah, that's actually a really good idea. That because they are very fun, and I always love when like merch is in universe,
Yes.
So that's really cool. What was I going to say about the second one? I forget actually. Tell me what I missed, because I have not seen Friday the 13th. I don't watch horror films, so obviously I know that's at a summer camp, but like any Easter eggs or just references that would have gone over my head?
Well, in Friday the 13th Part 2, I mean, because Jason, if you know Jason Voorhees, obviously, now one of the things is in Friday the 13th Part 1, Jason Voorhees is not the killer. I mean, they cover this in Scream, but it's his mother. Jason's mother is the killer in that movie, and that's like kind of the twist.
Right.
Because they let her, the counselors were hooking up, doing drugs, and they let her son drown. And then in the second one, we have Jason, but Jason does not have his hockey mask. He doesn't get his hockey mask till the third one. He does have a burlap sack over his head. So the axe slasher in this feels like a very direct reference to that. Although his axe is obviously very reminiscent of The Shining. That's what it reminds me of the most. But yeah, I think that's a big part of it. And then, I mean, they kind of play around with the idea, because it's well trodden territory that the trope is that the final girl is usually the virgin, or the good girl is the one that lives. And they even call because what's Ziggy's sister's name? Because it's C. Berman.
Cindy,
yeah. So like they even have like the kind of the bad girl character call Cindy like a virgin at one point, when like they're supposed to be like getting the camp ready, but they're having sex or whatever. So, they have strong implications like, oh, this is Cindy, she's going to live, blah, blah, blah. And of course they kind of throw a little bit of a twist at you there. So just kind of basics like that. I'm sure there are a lot more specifics. I'm actually going to do a rewatch Friday the 13th. I haven't watched the early ones in a long time, but those are like the glaring ones that they're throwing out there.
And what about the needle drops? Because I started hearing them in the second film because of you, essentially.
Yeah.
So did they keep annoying you, or did you feel like there was a good amount of needle drops?
For whatever reason, it didn't. Well, maybe number one, it didn't annoy me because I was already aware of it from the first one. Yeah. But I feel like it's probably more of a personal thing, because I grew up in the 90s, or, you know, it's just more of a reminder that I'm old. So I get annoyed because they're doing these needle drops that are songs I remember being on the radio or whatever. But here it is. This is almost like a period piece to other people, you know? So maybe
Yeah.
I'm just more annoyed because it's reminding me I'm old. Whereas in the 70s, they can play all the 70s rock. And I'm like, yeah, this is really setting the time. This is great.
Yeah, that's fun. I also feel like it's maybe, well, no, I didn't. They weren't that egregious as the film went on. I think it just kind of starts out, and because there's not as much like horror film music happening, then
Yeah.
use more of that at the start, and then it's more like fucking dun dun that kind of music coming in later on. But yeah,
A lot of
so
the early jokes, sorry to cut you up, before
sorry.
part 3 came out, everyone was like, oh, can't wait for the needle drops in 1666. And I almost kind of half expected we're going to hear like Westworldian type, like they were going to do folky
Oh yeah.
versions of actual songs. Thank God they did not do that.
Dude,
Uh,
can I say the bucolic, as the subtitles called it, bucolic folk music, and I had to Google it, which means like of rural areas, pastoral type folk music. It fucking slapped though in
yeah.
1666. I really liked that music. I was like, holy shit, I need to get, because it was like, I've heard there's like a similar one, but similar-ish, like music in the new version of Emma, that Jane Austen filmatization, which I'm not sure if you saw. More my speed than horror usually. So there was some music in that was also like, damn, this is fucking old school and it slaps.
Yeah.
And that was also the feeling I got here. So I kind of wanted to download that track when they're seeing the whole town and everything's great before it goes to shit.
Well, and I believe the composer they got for all 3 movies is Marco Beltrami, who also, I think they brought him in because he did the Scream score as well, and I'm sure he's maybe done some other big ones. But yeah, I think all of like outside of the needle drops, all the score is very good.
So let me say at the end of of part 2, at the end of part 2, when at the end of the flashback, when they're like, wait, you're Ziggy? I was genuinely confused. I was like, were we not supposed to understand that she was Ziggy? Because to be fair, at the start, I was like, I assumed there was going to be even more connections to present day than there were with the characters, like recurring in present day, that someone would be someone's mother. And I assumed that. I'm so confused as to why Martin is not at the summer camp, Martin being the sort of custodian at the mall, because they make him seem kind of important in the first one, and then in the third one, he is important, but then also there's no reason. Like, you assume he has a history with Sheriff Good or whatever, and because there's these confusing lines in the first one, but then he just isn't at the summer camp, and I'm like, okay, I guess maybe he was younger than the other characters or whatever. I don't know. But I was genuinely like, because they never say like, my name is Cindy Bergman or whatever. She just talks about my sister. So I'm thrown into it, and I was like, I'm not going to keep track of who's going to grow into who. I'm just going to like enjoy it. And then like, because I was like, I need to Google, make sure I know the characters. And then I'm like, I'm going to be spoiled immediately if I do that. So I'm just going to let it wash over me. And my assumption was that she was Ziggy, and she was Ziggy. So I was genuinely confused by the twist.
Well, the kids did know her as C. Berman. That's what she was in the phone book or whatever. So that's why I guess you assume that she's Cindy. But it really is kind of like, it doesn't even quite wash on
they
why.
don't even say it. Like, I mean, I know they couldn't say it because it's not true, but I was, sorry. I guess C and Cindy, but I just assumed from the characters and the tropes that it was the younger sister that would survive, and there we were. And then when they were zooming in at the end and the two of them were lying there, I was like, oh, were we supposed to think that Cindy was supposed to wake up? I did like her as a character. She was actually quite badass once she got started, right? But yeah, no, I didn't. But it was like an anti-twist for me.
It doesn't even quite wash on why, like, Nick Good would say that she's not Ziggy. Like, I don't even get in universe why he would say, like, she apparently she's living her life as Cindy when she was actually Ziggy, but I don't get why she would even do that. The only reason why that exists is to make it seem like a twist because they want you to think Cindy's going to survive the movie as the final girl, and then she's not. So I was kind of even confused on why Nick is like, because before she says like I'm Ziggy, like when the paramedics bring her back or whatever, and it's like her name's Cindy, and she's like Cindy, and like I don't know, that I didn't quite fully get. Anyways,
Wasn't it? Didn't he say Catherine or something? Or no?
I thought he said Cindy. I could be wrong.
We should double check that because I might also be wrong on that. But I thought it was more that Ziggy's a nickname. That's what I thought, but maybe I'm totally missing something here. We'll pull it up. We'll double check it.
Yeah, you know what? You're right. It probably is something like that, where Ziggy's a nickname, and I just didn't even quite pick it up or get why. I mean, I know obviously because that would explain why they're saying C. Berman the whole time. Yeah. So I think that that helps me because I missed that, because it's clear they only want to try it. This whole, like mistaken identity or whatever it is just so the audience thinks that Cindy's going to live, but it's not clear. Like it's not even that much worth it to be there. But I guess it is kind of still surprising because we're with Cindy through a lot of it, and then when she gets the fucking axe in the chest, it's like, oh shit, all right, here we go.
Yeah, well, for me, it wasn't, because I literally assumed that when she said my sister died, she was talking about Cindy.
Yeah.
I don't know why I ended up with that, but that's like just tropes-wise, picking up on... Basically, I was not paying attention to the names as much as like the subtext of who the characters were. Because at the start of the flashback, we're not with Cindy, we're with Ziggy. So she starts it out and she's running from people and getting strung up and burned. And we don't even see Cindy until a bit later. So I assumed that was, not her telling her own story.
But yeah, I did look it up. You're absolutely right. It's Catherine.
Okay.
So yeah,
cool.
I didn't have my subtitles on. I know you watch your subtitles. That explains it more, because I'm thinking like, is he switching their identity for no reason? But yeah, so Ziggy, aka Catherine Berman. Although I do see that maybe can C. Berman be trusted? There's a chilling Fear Street Part 2 theory that says otherwise. I'm sure that's a great one. But we won't get into it.
Actually, I feel like that was kind of what I was saying at the end of last episode as well. I was saying something like maybe C. Bergman is the one who's actually doing the thing at the witch thing, and we do get deeper into the lore. It's interesting how like the second film it works really well with the first one as far as we know the rules. Like they took them like the whole film of the first one to set up some of these rules, and in the second one, I guess they're expanded upon, but like with hints and stuff. The big beating heart that sort of recreates these killers and everything. So I think the way they expand upon the lore makes sense, but the whole thing of us not be us. It didn't land for us, either of us, the thing with the twist of Cindy and Ziggy. Yeah. And that would be fine normally, but I do think it kind of adds to the fact that the problem we predicted from film 1 still holds true to me, which is that we are in a flashback and it's a little hard to get super invested or care too much. We kind of know who survives and who doesn't. But it's an enjoyable ride, but... yeah, I don't know. I think that's why it would rank a little bit lower for me, even though I love the vibes all the same, as we keep saying.
For sure. And then, I mean, we predicted this discussing the first one. We finally get to have our character go through the Sarah Fear flashback. Because, I mean, we called it. I mean, we also called that maybe we'd even see a future version. I mean, that didn't come to pass. Although if they do this Fear Street MCU, I'm sure that's something we'll see. But when we got to see her like wake up in Sarah's past and like see the reflection or whatever, I was like, hell yeah, we're great. We called it. Here we go. And I mean, that leads us into part 3. And I think it's been clear from the beginning that Sarah Fear was going to be a victim, even if we end up finding that Sarah Fear actually did nothing wrong at all, which is even better in my opinion.
Put that on a t-shirt, bro. Yeah. Sarah Fear did nothing wrong. I also saw your tweet. I really liked it. Sarah Fear is a feminist icon.
Totally is.
That was great.
So it was clear that she was going to be a victim, but I still thought maybe because of the anger of like being done wrong that she was still a part of the curse. But no, she had nothing to do with the curse. Which I think is kind of great, but I'm getting ahead of myself. We get to have her live through like Sarah Fier's, flashback here, and then we get to have some of the actors from both part 1 and 2 pop up as these other characters, which is the nice shorthand of like, okay, we get that these are like good people because we liked them before, so we don't have to spend a lot of time like explaining who some of the villagers are as we're, back in 1666.
Yeah, and I liked how that was just kind of a detail of the magic. I mean, it worked out production wise. You can bring these characters back; they're good actors. But it's also like Sarah Fier. You are cast. Dina is cast in the role of Sarah Fier. So because this is all replaying in her mind, she sees the people she knows taking on these roles, which is just really interesting. I think it's kind of like a dream type way of doing it. But I did think my prediction was that maybe we'd see more of a time travel aspect where she'd be. I actually thought at the end of the second film she'd be trapped as Sarah Fier, but with her current consciousness, and then there would be kind of a Haunting of Hill House type time loop where she would end up, trying to stop what's happened, but that causes it, or something to do with Sunnyvale. We knew Sunnyvale was going to be evil, so something like that. But so I was a little bit disappointed when we went into the start of 1666, and it was just like, oh, they're just acting it out. And also, I had a hard time taking it seriously at the start with some of the accent choices, to be honest.
I could see that.
But I think it got going well, even though things did turn out very much as expected. Like, it takes like an hour for us to figure out that Sunnyvale is bad, which is like the first thing we said in the first discussion, that there's two communities. One of them is prospering. Basic devil worship stuff is that they're they're sacrificing the town next door. That was kind of the vibe we got from the start. And that's exactly what was happening. I did think Sarah Fier would be more involved, that the hand would be more relevant to the curse being set up. I think it all made sense the way it played out. Overall, it was an enjoyable flashback part. How did you find it?
Well, I agree with you, but also like it's tough because sometimes it being what you expected is more, people will try to use that as a sign of like bad writing, but it's actually good writing because it's no, this is what we've been building towards, and it's almost okay that you can see the glimpses of why that is, and we're going to go through the journey to get into it a little bit more. Like, it reminds me of something. I'm not going to spoil the end of Breaking Bad, but a lot of people say like, oh, they predicted where it was going to end, but that's okay sometimes because we're on a trajectory and you're building to something. You don't have to then pull the rug out from underneath you and change it. Don't get me wrong, sometimes that's great as well. So it's like a give and take either way. So because I was thinking the same thing, I was like, well, 1666 does kind of go into a lot of expected places, but not in a bad way. It's just more so these are themes and things they've been building on, and it comes to fruition in a certain way. One thing I do wish I like the completely, like, we have two movies that are different eras of slasher, between like the 90s slasher and the 70s slasher, and now we're changing it up a bit and getting more into like a gothic horror type thing where it's a little bit more of a creepy vibe. I wish we got to be in that a little bit more. Like with that creepy eyeless pastor and like what that entails. I wish there was just a little bit more of that. But this movie is essentially Fear Street Part 3, 1666, but also 1994 Part 2, which I loved, though. I loved when that title came up, and it's like Fear Street 1994 Part 2. But since they have to like get all the lore and get these things out, you don't have as much time, because like a gothic horror is more of a like sitting in dread for a bit. And they kind of have a little bit of that, but they also like, we need to get things rolling because we got to catch back up with 94 and then come to a conclusion. So my only little nitpick is I just wish there was a little bit more of the creepy vibes with the 1666 portion.
Yeah, if I could step back to what you were saying about like you don't always need to overcomplicate it. I feel like we always bring it back to Westworld to some extent, but really any show with notions these days, if we're watching it, we will often say exactly what you just said, which is along the lines of like, don't try to you don't need to overly complicate it. We just want a story that's well told.
Yeah.
In many ways, the simpler the better, because you can focus on actually making it emotionally resonant and like a well put together film or TV show. Whereas anything that just constantly tries to do the unexpected is usually just going to end up being shit.
Yeah.
So just doing a good story
Sure.
is pivotal. And I do think they've done that because they do a good job, even though they have slightly limited time in that they go back to 1994 and have to do all of this in one film. But like they do a good job of actually setting it up as like, this is a nice place to live at the start of this. Everyone's
Yeah.
kind of getting along. They have secret like parties where they take blueberries or poisonous, drugs in the
Yeah.
woods, which by the way, the pills in 1994, do you remember they called them blueberries? And then they have
Oh,
berries there that they take.
I did see the connection, but I missed that they actually literally call them that. That's cool.
Yeah. But yeah, they do a good job of setting it up as a good place to be. And then, like, it's a witch hunt, but like we've been building up to that, and it's predictable because it's a witch hunt, but like we've been building up to that for ages. And it's
Yeah.
also like pretty much telegraphed that Solomon, like Sol means son, he has split off. We know Shady Side and Sunnyvale have split off. So, and he's talking about how the land there is going to be better, and like, yeah, we kind of know it's him. Once things start happening, we can sort of figure that out. But yeah, it's kind of predictable, but that doesn't really matter, I think.
Yeah, because that's where like I do wish, because the only real character we know from Sunnyvale is Sheriff Good. And that kind of ties into some of my nitpicks of part one, where everything kind of felt empty all the time. Like
Yeah.
there wasn't really any other. I mean, besides maybe Sam. Besides Sam's mother, maybe like she's obviously like a snarling villain every time she shows up. But we don't. It's not like we know her too well. So it's like very limited in what it could be. And even by the end, I kind of wish, like, even though kind of Sunnyvale's getting their comeuppance in a way, there's not enough that we know about them besides they have nice houses and, you know, they're rich pricks or whatever. But yeah, it doesn't really matter that it's not like this big reveal. The way things fit in place and the way I guess it's more of a reveal that they don't do the expected, like, because I totally expected that Sarah was going to put some sort of curse on the people or something like that. But it's more
Yeah.
so that she puts a curse of she puts a curse of the truth on Good and his descendants, and how one day it'll come out. And I mean, it's smart use of subtext, and you know, I'm sure someone could write their own think piece about the Me Too movement and how the truth will eventually come out and the way it sets people free and yada yada yada. Like it works. It works on a few levels, so that's cool.
And the truth is red moss.
Yes.
I guess.
Well, I mean, that's the people that love the slash fix, at least on Twitter, from what I've seen, they love that detail. It is a nice romantic detail that the red moss grew everywhere because, you know, that when they had their night, she had the little, and when she was buried, she had the little crown of moss and whatever. The slash fix love it. I guess on the other end, once 3 finally came out, there were people that were shipping Good and Catherine or Ziggy because of, you know, 1978, and they're like, look at y'all now, like look at y'all idiots now who are shipping Good as being part of anything who's clearly evil.
Good is evil. That line kind of made me roll my eyes a bit. I
That's
was like,
annoying.
yeah, we knew that because you named the character Good. You could have hidden that better and had it be a real twist instead of having it be wordplay. But at the same time, because it is R.L. Stine, like I can't really complain about that sort of thing. My main question watching the third film was throughout, like, I was really wondering how much of the ending will be back in the standard time, because I was like, I hope it's a fair chunk of it, that it's a lot of it. I was really tempted to scrub along the timeline at the bottom and just see, are we back in Neon Land? So when we were back, as I said, I thought more of the 70s was going to connect to the 90s, which happened to some extent in that it was all about Sheriff Good. I guess he did the curse even that night, which I did not think at first. I
Yeah,
thought, it was his father, but his father's dead, I think. At this point, he's taken over. They talk about how he's got to
hair.
mantle this responsibility. He's the heir apparent and all of that. It just seems like shit timing, bro, when you're at the actual summer camp where this is happening, where, yeah, you need to sacrifice, but I don't know, maybe set off a killer at an old folks' home or something.
Yeah, I mean, 1978 just fleshes out more in subtle ways because that's where we first see like the beating heart, right? Or do we see
Yeah.
that in the first one?
No, it is.
And kind of just those underground caverns a bit and how that plays into it. And then why the hand, well, not why the hand, but how the hand's in like a different, like where they find it. I do like the touch of the hanging tree being in a mall. That's fun. I mean, that's different, but I think that's fun. So yeah, it was just more subtler ways and kind of filling in some of the blanks, at least a little bit of, what this good family was doing, adding the names to the wall and all that shit.
Yeah. What did you think about the Konami Code reference?
It's weird. I liked when they because the Konami Code he says in the first movie.
Yes,
because
but
remember
they
he
didn't
just
draw attention to it then and make it like a big thing, right?
Which I liked, and then I didn't necessarily love when they called attention to it, but it didn't make me roll my eyes either. So I'll give them that credit. Did you roll your
What about if you didn't roll your eyes at that? Did you at least roll your eyes when she wore a protective vest of horror books written by R.L. Stein? They were the actual Fear Street books that she sellotaped to her body, and they stopped her from being stabbed. Did you roll your eyes at that, Jim?
To be fair, though, were they actually not? They weren't Fear Street because we see those books in the beginning of part one. Because
but those are the Fear Street books. They just have a different
Fear Street on, which is fine though because it also is similar to when they almost stab Maya Hawke. She holds one of the books up and blocks the stab. But yeah, it was a bit much.
I felt like it was just a bit much and a bit thrown in. Like the idea of, a book blocking a knife is just, I mean, to be fair, it is full of tropes, this obviously, but it's just such a thing that like throwing it in at the last second and expecting me to take it seriously when you're holding up the books that your film is based on and protecting yourself with them. It was just very, I don't know. It was like, here's a theme. We threw it in at the end,
Yeah.
There you go.
And I also never even made the connection. I guess we're supposed to kind of understand because remember when in the first one when he's talking about the spray paint, I never even made the connection of the spray painting the Seraphir stuff on the wall until they spell it out for me in this third one. I was like, oh yeah, that's why spray paint. Of course.
Dude, I had no idea why Martin was in jail. I had no idea why they were saying these cryptic things to each other, and that made me think these characters must have a history, made me think we're definitely going to see some of that history in the flashback to their youth. But no, it was all, he was like, these are my spray cans, and you're supposed to think it's like a joke, but then it was his spray cans, and I'm like, okay, was he in there for spraying? That was never clear to me that Martin was in jail for that. He was just kind of there. I may have missed something, to be fair, but yeah, no, I was really... And then when Martin shows up again, right, so there's this scene in the first film where Dina's brother, what's his name, Josh? No.
Yeah, I think so.
So he like helps him get like a paperclip to like, I guess, pick his handcuffs or something, which seems like a bad strat when the sheriff definitely knows where you live. But yeah, he helps him escape and gets a business card, and then they go to him. And I don't know why I expected there to be some sort of more layers to all of this, because it's literally like, I know a guy who, well, I guess, yeah, he works at the mall, so he'd have the keys. That's why they go to him. But he just immediately agrees to kill the sheriff and then is just part of the gang. And just the way he's included is just so strange to me, given that he could have easily been in the second film as a younger person and given him a bit more context, whereas now it's just like, nah. Maybe he's a
cool enough character, but I agree with you. Like, it's just they kind of wedge him in a bit.
Yeah. And then they have this plan with the water guns, with blood. That's cool, but it also feels kind of like a repeat of the first film. I was a little confused as to, yes, when the killers are sent after someone, they will go for them. We all know this, but also there's obviously a bit of sentience to this where they're being sent after someone whose blood went on the witch's hand. So they're going after someone to make sure they don't hear the full story. Because that's what Sarah Fear wants the truth to be shared and needs the hand reunited to do that, I guess. But it was just kind of a little bit. It didn't quite. I forgot what I was gonna say, but did it make sense? The whole way. Why did they all the killers walk past people again when that's already happened and they've been destroyed? I guess we're supposed to assume that they're not sentient or smart enough, but also Satan or whoever is smart enough to send them after one specific person, and it feels like they should then maybe be smart enough to figure out, yeah, we need to kill all of these people because they all probably know the big secret that you're trying to cover up.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I just saw it. I respect it because it was an established rule. So you kind of can't go against it. So whatever the rules of this curse are, it's that, I mean, they obviously give, like, there's two things that happen. And it's something we talked about in the first one that they needed to explain. And I feel like they did, where there's like the main offering that the good family does, where they offer up a person every few years who then, is taken over by the devil or a demon or what have you and becomes a murderer, and they kill a bunch of people and then kill themselves. Now that's separate from when someone comes in contact with the remains of Sarah Fear and Sarah is trying to show them the truth. Yeah. And then what happens is this malevolent force then pulls these souls it's already consumed to destroy these messengers to get away from the truth. So I feel like it makes sense. I don't think they could then throw in the devil's voice being like, but now I know that or whatever. I mean, I guess maybe Fair. They could, but I think it works. I think it works in the established rules of however these curses work and what's happening, that if you're not being seen as the person who's now, I guess, cursed by Sarah Fear's truth, that you're not a target unless you actively. The only time you become a target is if you get in their way. Like if you physically get in their way, that's why in the first one he almost gets sliced up by the singing murderer, because he goes up to her and touches her or does something like that. So I do think I wish that the first one already kind of did a cool thing of, I don't want to say Home Alone, but I guess Home Alone-esque, where they got the mops out and they spread the blood around and they lured him in the bathroom and lit him on fire. So I think it undercuts this cool moment that they're building to here in the third one, because we kind of already saw it. It is cool, though, when they start spraying the other killers with the blood and they have to fight. That reminded me of Cabin in the Woods or something like that, where you're playing around a bit and kind of using some of the rules against the villain. I thought that was a nice touch. And that was cool, but I didn't have a problem with them using that thing again, where you were kind of safe if you weren't in contact with the blood.
No, that's fair. You've convinced me. I don't want us messing with the rules necessarily. But speaking of the rules, was it clear to you that, I mean, it makes sense because it's the end of the movie, but does killing good really break the curse definitively? Because so many goods have died through the years. Does he not have a son? What is it that actually, because clearly he has family, but I guess it's the direct bloodline or whatever. So maybe if he doesn't have a son, then that is the reason that it would break. But I was not completely clear on why, because they never, to me, it was never clear that they were yes, they were we have to kill good, which I would agree with, because he is the one actually making this happen. But the fact that it also made all of the monsters disappear, all of the slasher guys, they all burst into flies, that wasn't necessarily super clear. But also, I'm not gonna nitpick too much about it, because I'm it's the end of the film, this makes sense.
Yeah, I could see that. I mean, that's left that's almost, it's not quite a cop out, but it's similar to in an alien invasion movie when they're we just have to destroy the mothership and that kills all the other aliens. It's an easy way to aliens have they're on every continent right now, but if we kill the one ship, it just so happens to kill the rest. And I guess you could try to fill in the blanks of if he's the active,
Yeah.
person that's running the curse. But yeah, I agree. I think that you still have something. There's still a nitpick you could have there. The nosebleeds, I feel, is still fully like 1978 kind of mentioned something about the nosebleed and something to do with the Seraphir lore.
They say that,
Um,
yeah, when you're near the witch, basically, it makes your nose bleed. And I thought that the idea was that your blood needs to get on the bones for her to connect and show you memories. But then I'm
yeah.
not sure that actually happened. But at the end, because I thought that was also what was triggering, all the killers to go after someone. So she would have an interest in making people's noses bleed, like when they were on the bus and Dina's nose bled in the first film. So that kind of
Well,
adds up to me.
that's kind of what I mean, because it's like blood is important, at least from the way it's established. Like, yeah, it's not just kind of touching the bones, but it's also like your blood, like you touching them in your blood. But then Dina's nose bleeds when she's on the bus. I guess it's because they're driving by or
Yeah.
something. But I mean, I'm not gonna harp on it. I guess it is kind of Seraphir reaching out to people to try to, bring the truth to light. So I'll rock with it.
Yeah, and on Sheriff Good, like, I don't have a problem with the fact that killing him ended the curse. That's not a big deal. It was more a little bit confusing for them knowing what the plan should be and setting up this plan. And as you said, it's kind of a rehash of what they do in the school in the first film, which is
Yeah.
even though I did actually really like the third film, there was a point where like the climax had been going on for a while in 1994, and I'm like, what are we doing here?
Yeah.
We're spraying them and then we're closing them in, or what's the plan, guys? And that's why I was like, okay, they've definitely said they want to kill Sheriff Good, and I do agree, but are they really putting their eggs on that's gonna fix everything? Maybe I missed some lore or whatever, but yeah.
Yeah. And
Um,
then, well, what about how, what is it Mayor Good that then just gets smashed with a truck right after when they come out of the house?
I thought that was just some random like
I'm pretty sure it was supposed to be his because you know how his brother's in
that'd
power.
be great. That's great
Um,
if that's the case.
because it's, but I mean, it's, if you want to like nitpick, it's also kind of like I expected almost they come out of the house and everyone's like, oh my god, you killed the sheriff. Like, what a
Obviously,
more shady
yeah.
killers have gone crazy. But things
Yeah.
did work out because we do want to see the movie rises above the kill your gays trope, because usually the gays get killed, but the gays survive. So we don't want to see them end up in prison for ending the curse. But that was a high possibility because I'm like, oh my god, you're just coming out. Here comes the more shady side, fucking
Yeah.
psychos murdered our sheriff. But
Yeah,
I
no,
guess,
that was my reaction was like they're in this state where they've gone through so much trauma and shit that they don't care, but soon everything they're doing is going to be in court and they're going to be blamed for this and that, and then it's just like, nah, the curse is broken, and I guess they just because on the news they're like Sheriff Good was a serial killer or whatever, but like
yeah,
he never actually killed anyone with his hands as far as I know, so it's not like in the news they're like, and it was witchcraft from Sheriff Good was a witch. They don't say that, so I don't know exactly what they're blaming him for, but they're just pinning everything on him, an inconvenient target as opposed to the convenient targets we saw in the first film.
yeah, I guess because it's also related to the first movie because they're kind of show because it shows that the two people that died in that, like the school is kind of saying like in memory of, so maybe it's somehow tied to that, and that's why it like cleared their names.
Mm.
Because we get a nice little montage of a happy ending here, and I mean I was even yelling at the screen when they're walking out of when they're like, we did it, we killed Sheriff Good, and they're leaving the witch area, but they're leaving the book. I'm like,
Mm.
take the book. But of course, as you see, you watch through the credits, right, where your hand
Yeah, yeah.
comes in and grabs the book. So they're not done with you yet, not by a long shot.
Who's grabbing the book though, Jim? Who do you
That's
think it
right.
is?
You'd have to assume the rest of the Good family, like even if him and his brother, if that's his brother that gets hit by a truck, which I am almost positive it is,
Yeah.
the other members of the family have to understand what's going on. So the Good family is still, they're going to be out there.
All right, that's cool. I think we're pretty much concluded our discussion. I did want to say one last note on Ziggy, or Sadie Sink, who plays her. It's basically the same role as in Stranger Things. And at first I was like, her personality, I mean. And at first I was like, oh, she's just the same. And then I was like, I had a second thought of like, when any male character actor does this thing they're known for doing, I'm like, hooray, this is great. And then I was like, maybe I should be fine with someone doing the same role twice. It's, you know, not necessarily her stepping out of her box acting wise, because she's still like the tomboy who's annoyed at people,
True.
but actually is soft on the inside and what have you. But, you know, I was like, it's not her stepping out of her box, but it can still be a good performance. And I do think that it was. It was just a funny second thought I had where I was like, oh, just the same character from Stranger Things, more or less. And then I was like, oh, actually, I should not be so petty.
Yeah, no, I can see what you're saying, because I guess she has a big fan base, because I've seen a lot of people on Twitter loving her and being in it. But I also get what you're saying. Actually, so yeah, I guess maybe it was someone's in the chat saying it was just a random person. So why does that happen then? Why does someone get hit by a truck?
Yes, that's it. The mayor was dealing with the aftermath, according to the news.
Yeah.
I think that was just because to
Showing that
show that
bad stuff's going to happen in Sunnyvale now.
and potentially there's been an accumulation of no bad things happening, which will
Yes.
express itself more aggressively through, say, people getting fucking smashed with lorries.
Yeah, I mean, it's a funny scene, but I just feel like what a weird thing if it is just I guess, yeah, it does show that bad stuff's now going to happen in Sunnyvale. So I suppose I would have preferred it was the mayor, but I guess I'm wrong. So.
But I get kind of the vibe. I get what you're saying. But then they wouldn't. I don't think the mayor would have looked at them and be like, "Oh, who's that?" and just driven off because it's your brother's house.
Yeah. But also, well, you actually want to talk about rolling your eyes. I rolled my eyes when they were talking about solid state drives in that scene at the end. When is he selling MP3 players? Is he the inventor of MP3 players in that moment?
I will admit I didn't quite follow. I was like, are they?
Because I know he doesn't like
CDs.
Yeah, he doesn't like those. And then, I mean, the girl comes up, and I guess we find out she's the one from the AOL chat, right? Because she puts the screen name on his cast. But she's talking about SSDs, and not to be that fucking guy, but no one's talking about SSDs in 1994 in high school. I know she's this genius, kick-ass chick that he's been talking to on the internet for a long time. But that's when I was like, no, enough of this. Thankfully, it was at the end where I couldn't get too worked up, but I did not like that scene whatsoever.
I feel like even 2004, people still weren't talking about SSDs, really, you know? But maybe that's just me. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe some people were. On the truck crash, again, the reason it made sense to me was that it has this Crossroads demon vibe where you get everything good for 10 years, but then you're fucking fucked. And so that was kind of the impression I got. You've had your 10 years of fame and fortune, so now your town is not just going to be like you might randomly be hit by a truck, but more like we need to balance all the good that you've had.
But that goes back to my criticism then. Like, if we had more of a face for Sunnyvale, like we at least had one other character who, whether he was a news reporter or if it was like Sam, it could have been like Sam's boyfriend that was groping her at the vigil or something. Like, if it was just someone else, I would have understood that more. But I guess it still works as a random person. But that's why I'm grasping for, like, was I supposed to know who the fuck that was that got hit by a truck? That's why I'm grasping at it. Like, the only other person I know is Good's brother. But yeah, what you're saying still makes sense. But that, I think, just leads more credence to some of my criticisms on more of a face for Sunnyvale and kind of the privileged pricks that are getting all the good and none of the bad.
Yeah, and I mean, every single person in Sunnyvale is a piece of shit, according to the films as well. Like, they're constantly just... It's not like they're fine with the Shady Siders, like, killing each other and just going, whatever. They're like, we're going to antagonize the shit out of them about the fact that they keep getting murdered and we don't. And then Sheriff Good is obviously supposed to be the one reasonable person, turns out to be the evil mastermind behind it all. So there's really no face left to pin on. Like, there's no like beautiful merging of the two towns coming back together. It's more like, fuck Sunnyvale, now Shady Siders are gonna rule. It's very much like Pawnee and Eagleton in Parks and Rec, but with a bit more occultism.
But Otherwise, overall, very good, very enjoyable. Love the release strategy.
Yeah.
Just love the idea of having a trilogy of movies just ready to go. And it had, even if you have some, quibbles with the flashbacks of part 2 being the main thing, it's almost rare these days to have a trilogy that is planned out and shepherded by not a ton of hands coming in with their own ideas, a group of people, creatives that sat down and made a trilogy from start to end. Because usually, and especially big trilogies, it's people kind of just figuring out as they go, and it doesn't quite work that well. So it was nice to see, and I hope to see more from these filmmakers and even from some of these characters if they continue with it. So I hope for it.
That's such a good point where my nitpicks about the rules should maybe have been this or that. Imagine any other end of a trilogy, whether it's Star Wars or Pirates of the Caribbean, they don't give a shit about any of the rules established in the first film. By the time they get to the third one, they're just we got to end it somehow.
Yeah.
So yeah, you're very right. Seeing that consistency is great. I think that concludes, most of our chats on Fear Street. But if they do expand it into an R.L. Steiniverse, I think we will probably cover more of it here. So you can check out showswhatyouKnow.com for all of our coverage of random television shows at the moment. We're kind of bouncing between stuff as we're figuring out what to cover next. But we've also discussed every episode of The Sopranos. We've discussed every episode of Cobra Kai. And you can find all of that along with Real History, a podcast where we talk about historical films and television and talk about the real history behind that time, and Blank Meets Blank, where we make up a new TV show every episode, and all of that is at showswhatyouKnow.com. Is there anything else, Jim?
Shit. Not really. I guess there's just one thing I'll say is the truth will set you free.